Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion about a post-Roe America. I'm Rose Aguilar. I host Your Call, a live public affairs daily radio show on NPR affiliate KALW in San Francisco. You can listen live during the week at 10 a.m. Pacific time or listen anytime at yourcallradio.org. Tomorrow marks the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade, which legalized the right to an abortion in the United States. The conservatives on the Supreme Court ended that right by overturning Roe in June 2022. Abortion is now banned in 15 states and heavily restricted in another 7. Tonight, we'll talk about how this is affecting people across the country, and we'll find out how activists are responding. If you have any questions for our guests or comments or personal stories you'd like to add to the conversation, please click on that Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. We begin tonight's event by featuring trailers celebrating the re-release of 2 of Dorothy Fadiman's films, the Oscar-nominated When Abortion Was Illegal, Untold Stories, and the Emmy-winning From Danger to Dignity, The Fight for Safe Abortion. You can watch both films online at choiceatrisk.org. That's choiceatrisk.org. They are also available in Spanish at concentric.org. That is concentric.org. And I'll repeat that throughout the evening tonight. Please share the link and the films with your networks, especially the young people in your life who might not know what the back alley days were like. Or if you're watching and you're a young person, please share it with your friends. First, I'd like to welcome Dorothy Fadiman. Dorothy Fadiman is Executive Director of Concentric Media, a documentary film group. She's been producing documentaries with a focus on social justice and human rights for almost 5 decades. When Dorothy was a college student in 1962, she became unintentionally pregnant. She had no savings, no committed partner, and her family was 3,000 miles away. Abortion was illegal in California back then, so she paid $600 cash to a stranger, a person whose face she never saw. She was blindfolded throughout the procedure. Soon afterward, she began to hemorrhage and ended up on the intensive care ward of Stanford Hospital with a fever of 105 and septicemia, a blood infection that had killed so many women who risked the back alleys or aborted themselves. Dorothy Fadiman has kept her story to herself and remained silent for 30 years. In 1991, she realized that the Supreme Court could overturn Roe. Most people had no idea what the dangers of the back alleys had been when abortion was illegal. So she decided to make a documentary based on what she had lived through and survived and what had happened to so many other women. The Oscar-nominated short film, When Abortion Was Illegal, Untold Stories, became the first of 3 in the trilogy From the Back Alleys to the Supreme Court and Beyond. Hi, Dorothy. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and thank you so much for your important work. Can you tell us why you made When Abortion Was Illegal, Untold Stories after remaining silent for 30 years?
Well, I was aware that I had never heard anybody talk about their own back alley abortion. And I realized there was a generation of young women and men who had no idea what it meant when abortion was illegal. So one by one, I began to find people throughout the country who were part of this story. At first, they were very reluctant. Many of them had never told their story to anybody. But I realized that if I gave them this opportunity, that might give them a sense of having meaning, purpose, and it being valuable. And it was. So that's some of why I began.
Well, let's watch the trailer. This is the trailer for the Oscar-nominated film When Abortion Was Illegal, Untold Stories.
When we got them, we received them like with a temperature of 105, bleeding, totally infected. We had some die in shock. They was just plain housewives who felt like, I can't afford another child.
I went to medical school in New York City in the 50s when abortions were illegal, and every day 20 or 30 women come in infected, bleeding and dying from abortions that they had induced themselves. It was true in any major city in the 50s.
There were many of us out there looking desperately for some place to solve the problem.
I couldn't have that baby because if I did, I would die.
To have a baby without a husband just was not done. The only thing I could do was to get an abortion.
I just really literally walked up and down the street, and they would say, "Nobody's there, I don't know what you're talking about."
A woman told me that she would do it, and then I was in tears. And she just held me up to her chest for a minute, and she said, "Honey, did you think it was so easy to be a woman?"
I knew that I could lose my medical license. I knew that I could go to prison. And just as I had to trust these women not to bring charges against me, they had to trust that they were going to leave there intact and alive.
A woman that's unhappily pregnant will risk her life to stop that particular pregnancy. And then later in her life, she will happily risk her life to have a child. This is the same woman.
That was the trailer for the Oscar-nominated When Abortion Was Illegal, Untold Stories. Dorothy, what was the response to those powerful stories and that film?
Immediately, no matter where I showed it, and I've shown it all over the world, people began to tell their own stories. Hearing the stories from the people who lived through it, and some didn't live through it. One of the interviewees in the film is a woman whose sister did a self-induced abortion and died. Mm. But seeing the doctors, the courage, then as now, in many states throughout the United States, and some of the other interviewees can say more about this, a doctor is risking his license and risks going to prison for decades if it's found out in that state that he performed an illegal abortion.
Right.
So what I experienced when I first began to show them was people stepping forward, usually weeping as they shared their own story for the first time.
Mm. Tell us more about why you made the other film, the Emmy-winning From Danger to Dignity, The Fight for Safe Abortion.
It was clear that almost no one, including me, knew the history of how we got from the back alley days to Roe v. Wade. And in terms of Roe v. Wade, one of the most powerful interviews in From Danger to Dignity is Sarah Weddington said yes to us. And I and a cameraman from PBS, we flew to Texas and we interviewed Sarah. And what I didn't know is one of the most powerful stories she had was about her own back alley abortion. And she talks about being in the Supreme Court and just getting a wave of how important it was, having lived through it as she did, to share that story. And Danger to Dignity is filled with people from the back alley days who took chances. Doctors who took chances, women who provided illegal back alley procedures to women and study. In fact, the Janes are one group we had to interview in that film. And the Janes were able to share how powerful it was to provide a safe, illegal back alley abortion to so many women.
Well, here's the trailer for the Emmy-winning documentary From Danger to Dignity, The Fight for Safe Abortion.
If you see something that's so wrong socially, and you have a chance and you don't do anything about it, it's hard to sleep with yourself at night.
From 1961 until 1973, the struggle for abortion rights became one of the fastest-growing social movements in the history of the United States. On the front lines were people willing to challenge the law, and if necessary, break the law.
If you needed an abortion, you couldn't look in the phone book.
I thought, there must be another way. It's got to be another way.
We had people calling us for the instructions on do-it-yourself abortion.
Pregnant, need help? Call Jane.
We worked nonstop to change the law.
It was a dirty subject. You didn't discuss it at dinner table.
Of the million American women who were each year having abortions, every single one of them was a potential felon.
Abortion was something that really needed to be changed in America, that this was criminal.
I'm tired of having half the world tell the other half what they should do with their own body.
The hypocrisy got to me.
Could we have saved 367 young women from dying if we had not imposed upon them our sense of morality?
To change the law, we had to challenge it openly.
I think we ought to counsel women and help women get abortions, even if it's against the law.
We had a revolution in this country of women saying we're not going to do this anymore.
You couldn't listen without your heart aching for every single one.
It was our right, our decision.
For the first time in history, it was all going to be safe.
That was the trailer for the Emmy-winning From Danger to Dignity, The Fight for Safe Abortion. You can watch both films online at choiceatrisk.org. Dorothy, I just have to ask you, watching these trailers, you're re-releasing these films in the hopes that they'll be seen by people who maybe are not familiar with them, and especially young people who don't know much about the back alleys. I think about you and other activists who've spent decades fighting for the right to an abortion. What are your thoughts, I have to ask you, about where we are right now, given what you've been through and given the films, these important films that you've made?
My husband wrote a book about selves, the many selves in us all. So several of us will answer that question. One of me is heartbroken at watching what's happening now, hearing the news. And I'm so grateful to the activists who are in the trenches, making safe procedures available, transporting women, raising to another state where it's safe, raising money to provide education to these people. So one of me is just heartbroken. The other of me is empowered because I meet so many people now, women, doctors, activists, who have information, who have suggestions, who have support, so that women who are confused and in many cases desperate have places to go. And that's a lot of what my work is about now, is making those places to go available in a number of different ways.
Well, if you have any questions for our guests or comments or personal stories you'd like to add to this conversation, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And now we would like to welcome our other two guests. Lupe Rodriguez is Executive Director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice. That's an organization that fights for equal access to reproductive health for Latina and Latinx communities. Lupe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined tonight by Lori Bertram Roberts, co-founder and executive director of the Mississippi Reproductive Freedom Fund, Mississippi's only reproductive justice organization that believes in access to full reproductive health care that includes abortion as a human right and an essential part of reproductive justice. Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, if you can unmute, Lori. Great. Thank you.
I do this every time. I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Lori, I want to start off with you because you actually watched the films before this event. And I just wonder, what did they bring up for you? Just watching the trailers brings up so many emotions.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the first movies I ever showed when I was the president of Mississippi Now were these two films, right? So I tracked Dorothy down. She probably does not remember this, but this is a true story. I tracked her down, called her. She got on the phone with me, sent me actual physical DVDs because that's how long ago it was, so that I could show this movie at our meeting. So number one, it's always been a profound little tool in my toolbox. Like I want to take it out every 2 years and show it, even before Roe fell. But something that stuck with me, aside from the fact that my own understanding about abortion and non-stigmatizing abortion and reproductive justice has come so far since the first time I saw it. So there's like new things I think about. But there's one woman in the short film who says, she just said it in the clip, a woman who doesn't want to be pregnant will risk her life to not be pregnant, and a woman who wants to be pregnant will risk her life to stay pregnant, and they're the same woman. And that has sat with me forever. And the fact that a lot of things haven't changed. Like everything that's new right now is old. Even down to the bill that they've got in the Mississippi legislature right now to try to prevent us from even being able to tell people where they can go get an abortion. Right? This is all old stuff that they've dug back up. So I as someone who loves history and loves documentaries, I just think it's always important to realize that, you know, history is cyclical, and that it's just so critical to understand that history, to understand why we are where we are now.
Mm. What about you, Lupe? What did the trailers bring up for you?
You know, I think what Lori just said is also so present for me watching this and thinking about the impact of abortion bans on Latina people, that, you know, the majority of the people who are impacted right now are already mothers. They're already people trying to raise their families in health and dignity. They're folks who are just, you know, trying to live. And I think, and they recognize that having the ability to make a choice about their own bodies, a choice about their family size, is critical for their ability to be able to raise their families in dignity and health, and their ability to thrive. And so what this film reminds me of, is that, you know, that piece of indignity that these bans are, you know, are throwing on our communities, is a really important part of this. Like um, the experience of people is so different. The experiences of all the different people who need or want abortions are so different. And I think the films demonstrate that there are women from all walks of life, who need or seek abortion, and who have families, and et cetera. And so it just makes me think about that. And for the Latina community, who by the numbers are some of the most impacted in the country right now, the issues of a lot of other sort of intersecting issues that keep us from being able to have healthcare access to begin with, are just made so much worse by these bans, and by the restrictions that are coming forward in the states that are seeking to strip people of their rights. And so so really just makes me think about that, makes me think about the very sort of hard lived experiences that the folks are going through right now.
You make a really good point. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Lori.
No, I was just going to also say that just the power in our stories, right? The power in our stories of not just documenting history, but of telling our abortion stories, whether it was a life-saving abortion or it was just you weren't ready. Like there's power in breaking that silence.
Thinking about what happens when a clinic closes, what that means to a city, the numbers are, it's really to really just kind of let this sit for a moment, to think that 139 independent abortion clinics have been forced to close or stop providing abortion care since 2018. 14 states are now without a single abortion providing clinic. And many of those clinics provide a wide range of healthcare beyond abortion. I think, Lori, this is such an important point that I just don't see it mentioned in major media. That not only are people losing access to abortion, but they're losing access to so much important healthcare.
And that a lot of these providers are the only healthcare that some people even see, right? These were trusted healthcare providers, not just for women, but also a lot of times for trans healthcare, for like, you know, for LGBT affirming healthcare. Like there's a lot of intersections there around just being able to access someone who fully sees you as human and a sexual being and will respect your wishes. And as a disabled person, I just want to, like say a lot of us are poor. It's hard for us to get to providers. So if you get to a provider for your abortion and they talk to you about other things, because they always do, it's a lie that they just like rush you in like a cattle and give you an abortion and send you out. A lot of times that's how they catch people's high blood pressure. It's how they catch people's, breast cancer. It's how they catch people's, other ongoing manageable illnesses that are often unmanaged.
Laura, can I jump in there and just say, absolutely echo what you're saying? Rose, for many in the Latinx community, and particularly folks who are undocumented, many of these clinics that Lori, you are talking about are the only places where folks were able to get care because they were not asked about documentation status. They were some of the only entry points any of these communities had into any kind of healthcare. And so Lori's right. These are places where folks would, find out if they had hypertension, find out if they had other chronic diseases, right? Like it's the one place because of the broken healthcare system we have in this country that excludes folks because of their documentation status. And now those places are lost for many community members. We work with folks in the Rio Grande Valley in Southern Texas, and the one clinic that was supporting the community there is now closed and is now an anti-abortion center. So, these kinds of the effects of these bans have been far and wide and go much, much beyond abortion access. They go to healthcare access, critical first entry point, basic healthcare access for many in our communities. And we haven't seen the outcome of that yet. I mean, it's going to be bad. It's dire.
What are these people doing, especially in the Rio Grande Valley, given that these clinics have closed?
People have to travel hundreds of miles to be able to get the care they need. I mean, of course, in Texas, there is no option at this point for getting abortion care through a clinic center. So they'd have to travel out of state to be able to get that care. To get other kinds of basic care, they have to travel hundreds of miles to other clinics. But one thing that folks don't think about or even know sometimes is that people with documentation status, and we elevate their stories a lot because they get lost, but people with documentation who are undocumented have fear of traveling even within their states, and particularly in states like Texas. There are immigration checkpoints that are inside the state lines, not at the border, and they are at major highways, major places of travel. And so folks are stuck in their homes, stuck in their communities for fear of detention, deportation, and separation from their families. That is another part of this story of these bans and the effects it's had on people, because when you don't have you no longer have a clinic or a safe place to get care in your local community, many of these folks cannot travel even, to another city in the same state to get the care they need.
And to share a really important stat from Texas, in 2021, the year before the bans, there were more than 50,000 abortions performed in Texas. So 50,000. Last year, there were 40. What is happening with these people who do not want to be pregnant? Who's keeping track of this?
Pills, a lot of it. Self-managed abortion is definitely on the rise. People knowing about it. I mean, it was on the rise before, Roe fell, but it definitely is well talked about now. Like there was just a study that came out in Mississippi where the rate of unintended pregnancy has gone up, but not the birth rate. So folks are still, like one of my friends said, abortion finds a way. Abortion, we're going to find a way. And the thing is that we're in a different era where you don't need a coat hanger to start a miscarriage. You just need some pills. So like you don't need, like even you don't need all like that kind of risk, right? Abortion pills are safe. And so and they're being mailed from other states and other countries, and the post office has no interest in trying to stop it. So that's what's happening for a lot of folks. And then for a lot of folks, they're just not getting their abortion. I was a turnaway patient in the 90s. I know what that feels like. It is heart-wrenching and it is traumatic, and I don't wish that on anyone. But you know, we know that from like a young girl named Ashley in Mississippi who was featured in Time, right? Her mom looked around. She didn't know there was abortion funds and found nothing. And the thing that I think gets lost in the story sometimes is how well anti-abortion propaganda has worked. So long before the clinics even closed, every year you're doing the legislature and you're saying we're closing the last abortion clinic, we're closing the last abortion clinic, we're closing the last abortion clinic. And that gets pressed for like 5 or 6 or 7 days or even a couple weeks. And then when they don't do it, it gets one story. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people in Mississippi, they thought there was no access before we even went to no access.
Dorothy.
Yeah, one of the things that From Danger to Dignity profiles is the wide range of alternatives people figured out. And one of the major cast of characters in that was the clergy. There were clergy throughout the country who found safe, illegal abortions for women who had no idea of where to turn. It's very, very moving and inspiring to see and hear all the different ways that people did figure out how to find and get abortions when they were strictly illegal.
Well, and Dorothy, I think what's changed so much since your films came out, thinking about the back alley and women being left to die, is what Lori just said, that like mifepristone, for example, is now used for half of abortions. And that is why there's a well-funded campaign to go after mifepristone and ensure that the Supreme Court takes up the case, which they have. So that's the other thing I'd like to ask you all about, maybe toward the end, is how to counter this, because this is very well funded. It's been documented. What are your thoughts on that, Dorothy, that now with the pill, people luckily don't have to resort to the back alley, but then you wonder, what about those people who don't have access to the pill? What are they resorting to?
One of the things we are working toward in re-releasing the films is to support and cultivate activists who have come up with ways to make this possible and to fight the legislation that's being drafted throughout the country. So when people realize what's at stake, they're much more likely to sign a petition, to register to vote, to write letters to certain bodies of information who are starting to legislate against it. So what we're doing to a large extent is cultivating activists and supporting them.
You brought up the young girl in Mississippi, Lori, and just for some context for people who may not be familiar with this is a 13-year-old rape victim who gave birth at the age of 13. And I remember reading comments from people who said, I didn't know people could get pregnant at age 13, which says a lot about what the media really have not covered up until now. Like you say, so her mom didn't know she was pregnant, according to the report, until she was 10 weeks along. She could not afford to take her daughter to Chicago to get an abortion. So can you talk about what the landscape is like today for financial assistance, and what does it take to reach people like this young girl and her mom?
Yeah, it takes thousands of dollars. I don't know what else to say. It literally takes it. I always say, people say you shouldn't pour money on problems, but sometimes the only way to fix a problem is to pour money at it. And that's where what we find with having to help people get out of state, or even, like working with orgs that send pills like from another state, and in funding those people's stuff. Like one of the things we did is we just started giving people their cash in their hand, and then they can take it and do what they need to do with it. But yeah, it takes a lot. It takes people answering the phone. It takes people that know logistics. Sometimes it takes 5 and 6 and 7 abortion funds to get one person funded. right? And that was common before Roe fell, but it's really common now. Because you need $1,000 to get somebody to Carbondale, Illinois, and back, between how much they need for their procedure and like driving. Most of our people don't fly. Right? We deal with plenty of folks who are undocumented and also who just don't have IDs. So it takes a lot. Sometimes it's taking people to get their IDs. Sometimes it's getting people out of jail so they can go have their abortion. But everything's harder now because we have a higher demand and we've had less donations. And I'm not the only one that's saying that. Like, that's been across the board covered by press that, it's like people got attention fatigue and they've moved on to something else. And yet every day folks still need access. And there's only so many of us on the ground doing that work.
Lori, Dorothy.
One of the things we're doing to raise money is we're going to be holding house parties nationwide. Because when someone is moved, and then many people are moved by the films, moved to tears, very often they're much more open to making a donation. And so the house parties will also have study guides. And in the study guides will be not only information about how to find out a lot of the things that you all are doing, but about the importance of being generous and supportive.
We're so grateful.
Lupe, can you talk about what the financial assistance situation is like in Texas and how your group and others are trying to reach out to people to let them know that assistance is available?
I think, as Lori said, there are some really fierce abortion funds around the country and in Texas as well that are helping folks, get the resources they need to be able to leave the state if they can, to access other kinds of care through medication. But it's risky. I'll say this, that I think Lori's right. Folks are finding a way, but we know and we're seeing, particularly in Texas and other southern states, that the attorney generals, the city attorneys, the local sort of law enforcement folks are going after people for supporting others in getting this care. And so we're watching that really closely because we know that there's a huge specter of fear for many people to be able to to get this support and to get this, or to seek this care, or to get support or give support. And so I think the abortion funds in Texas are under a lot of pressure, both, as Lori said, because the demand has increased exponentially, but also because of this criminalization and the specific now emphasis that a lot of these law enforcement folks are putting on them and how they're supporting people. I think, I'll also again say that for undocumented folks and folks without other documentation for other reasons, as Lori mentioned, leaving the state has not been or is not an option. And because of immigration checkpoints, because of other barriers, it's been really tough. I think, and not to mention, of course, that the folks have to have the time, right? Like the time off work, the childcare, the like person covering for them if for example this is something that they don't want to share with their families or with their communities for whatever reason. And in Texas specifically, because of the really terrible vigilante criminalization laws, folks are scared to tell their families, folks are scared to tell their friends, folks are scared to tell their colleagues or other people in their communities. And so that's made for conditions that I think make it much more difficult for folks to get this care. And so we're seeing groups on the ground that are trying their best to put money in folks' hands and get folks the resources, but they're not getting the donations, as Lori said, that they used to, and they're scared. One of the things that we've been trying to support with is getting folks information, doing a lot of legal research to ensure that folks get information in ways that enable us all to continue doing this work, right? That don't put us in criminalization situations. Supporting some of the local groups to be able to do that, to have that information as well, because we're all being watched very closely.
We're going to get to questions from the audience in a minute, but I first wanted to ask you, Lori, that you're in Jackson, Mississippi, and this is where the Supreme Court case originated. And even before the Supreme Court ruling, Mississippi, like Texas, heavily restricted abortion. And just a week after the court overturned Roe, abortion became illegal in Mississippi, and the Jackson Women's Health Clinic shut down, which was devastating to so many people. It was the only clinic to offer abortion. So can you just, I think this is so important because I just did a search to see what's going on in Mississippi. Other than that Time article, there's not that much out there. And so I just wonder what are you hearing from low income people, young girls, people of color, LGBTQ people? How are they dealing with this?
All our people. They're struggling. I mean, we have people who don't even realize abortion is illegal until they go to get an abortion, because not everyone is as plugged in as we are. And so if you're busy just trying to survive, maybe you didn't get the memo that we no longer have a clinic and now it's a resale shop, right? Like maybe you missed that part. But also just when I think about the hurdle of getting the money, it was a hurdle for people when Jackson Women's Health was open, right? For them to get $600 for their if they were early, right, for an early procedure, and the travel money. A lot of times from the Delta, from southern Mississippi. Jackson is in the middle of the state, but it's still far away. So, people were already traveling 2 and 3 and 4 hours. And I know in Texas it's very similar. People were already traveling 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. Well, now they're traveling 12 hours, 24 hours, right? And if it's 10 hours one way, that means it's 20 hours round trip. Carbondale, Illinois is the closest abortion clinic from Jackson. And all I hear from people all the time is that's really far, right? And that's not even talking about the logistical hurdles of folks who have never been in snow before. Like we don't get real snow down here. Okay. So people who don't have winter coats. I mean, these are like real, like when I tell people it's a real basic challenge. And it's hard to fight the disinformation and the misinformation that the anti-abortion people put out there because they have so much money, so much time, and everyone thinks that they got Jesus on their side. So
that reminds me of somebody who we worked with at Latina Institute who said they were in Texas and the closest clinic there to them was New Mexico. And they said, going to New Mexico feels to me like going to the moon. I mean, it's that kind of incredible just barrier for people. You might as well, be telling me that I'm going to the moon. I mean, it's folks who have the liberty and the privilege of being able to travel don't understand that so many in our communities have incredible barriers to movement, and we're seeing the effects of that right now.
Yeah, and let me just piggyback that a little bit by saying, not only are there roadblocks and checkpoints and stuff outside of people's cities, in Mississippi, we have roadblocks all over the place that check for your license and your registration all the time. So if you're someone who doesn't have a driver's license and I'm saying to you, you need to drive 10 hours to get your abortion, I might as well be telling them to go, walk on water. With what car? With what, a lot of folks don't have cars that are like good enough. So yeah, I don't think we talk about it enough. And am I surprised that there's not more press about it? No, the press has picked a certain narrative of what abortion has to look like in the media, and it needs to be tragic. Right. And it needs to be tragic, and we need better than that. That's why I'm excited about this. Like I wholeheartedly know we need people. I'm not negating anybody's tragic story. I'm just saying those aren't the only stories, right? I'm grateful for that my abortion saved my life. Period.
Well, we have a number of great questions from the audience, so I'll go through a few of these. First, Dorothy, where can we find more information about the nationwide house parties being organized?
If you write to the Choice at Risk site, and actually you can even put something on this timeline now, that we will be getting back to you because we're going to make it widely available that these are going to be held, hosted, study guides, all of the above.
Okay, great. And again, that is at risk.org. And Dorothy, also, given that you've been doing this work for so long, there's so much dire information, but I think it's important to point out that in study and poll after poll after poll, abortion receives support from 70% of the population. And when these horrific laws go to the voters, no matter where, they say, nope, we are voting for reproductive rights. And that deserves so much more attention.
And that is one of the ways we're using the films, because in state by state, we're finding activists who are willing to hold the house parties, who are willing to give each other information. And for people who have no idea what this is really about, they invite their friends and they show the film, and people say, oh my God, now I understand. So, and Laura, you can speak directly to this, that time after time, people see the film and get why they need to become active.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think especially now when you can see the parallels, it's so clear. It's not, you don't need to watch The Handmaid's Tale. You can watch a documentary that's telling you this is what they did before and this is what they're trying to do now. They're trying to turn back the clock on everything. It's not just access to abortion, it's access to birth control. That's why there's an attack on the Comstock, like to reinstate Comstock law. If you don't know what that is, like there means no birth control, no abortion pills through the mail, no, you know what I'm saying? And if we allow that to happen, who are we? Like, honestly, who are we to just let them take from our hands our own choices and our own freedom? I think about that all the time. I'm not gonna lie. I do. I think about it all the time.
And I want to say one of the ways we're cultivating young activists who have some idea what's going on, but have never been in the trenches, have never been themselves active, is I have a young staff using social media. And we're posting clips on social media nationwide. Some of the clips are just 10 seconds long. 10 seconds hit you, you get it. And then there's how to become active, how to support your neighborhood, how to vote, where to vote. We can't tell people what to vote for, but we can tell them to register voters and to vote. So we're using social media heavily to get out young activists and give them tools.
Dorothy, and I love that. Sorry.
That's fine. Dorothy, what strikes you about what you hear from today's young activists around this issue?
Is what moves them above all. And there's an organization doing this nationwide. And the name of the organization is Abortion Out Loud. And they are asking for stories, recording stories, publishing stories, because hearing a young person tell her own story seems to be a powerful activist generating experience, because hearing someone tell their own story makes you aware.
We have another question. How do we ensure we are not in the situation of El Salvador, the women there, total criminalization of women for being able to be pregnant?
I'll just say we have to keep mobilizing every time someone's criminalized and start mobilizing to get the criminalization laws off the books in our states. It's one thing if there's going to be an abortion ban, that's bad enough. But then on top of that, to layer on a criminalization, like I feel like there's something that the pro-choice movement kind of dropped, right? Was like kind of missed the boat on making sure we're not criminalizing people, because the people most likely to be criminalized are poor and Black and brown. And it just hasn't been a central issue until recently for people to mobilize around and say, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on with Brittany Watts? What on earth is going on with, a woman being locked up for years for having a miscarriage, right? One of the things I say about those cases, and I like to focus on, is that there is no good side to fetal personhood. If you don't understand that their goal is fetal personhood and to take your rights away through fetal personhood, then a case like Brittany Watts' case doesn't even make sense. Like I had to explain to people how she could be getting desecration of a corpse for a miscarriage. And I'm like, because they're misusing laws that were supposed to protect people who have miscarriages, and they know what they're doing. They know those laws are there so that they can get their foot in the door with personhood and be able to criminalize folks. But thankfully, she's free. She's free from prosecution. But that's because of grassroots organization. Latice Fisher in Mississippi was the same way. We mobilized for a year to get her case dropped. A year. She could have sat in jail for a year if no one mobilized.
Wow.
So if we're not willing to take to the streets or talk to prosecutors, or prosecutors have discretion. They don't have to prosecute these cases. It's up to them. And I think we can learn a lot from the prison abolition movement and from people who want to change criminal justice, because there's a lot of power in prosecutors' hands.
And also learn from activists in Mexico and South America.
Yes.
Lupe, you've done work in Mexico, and I'm just reading right now from a Vox article, September 2023. Mexico Supreme Court decriminalized abortion nationwide. Since Argentine lawyers voted to legalize the procedure in 2020, Colombia's highest court decriminalized abortion. Ecuadorian lawmakers made abortion legal in cases of rape, and Chilean lawmakers began seeking to guarantee women's reproductive rights through the country's new constitution. People in those countries have been working for so long to get to this point.
Yeah, I think we can learn so much in the US from the Marea Verde or Green Wave movement that was started in Argentina and has, mobilized and engaged people across countries in Latin America and Mexico in the last few years, and has led to these incredible victories in decriminalization. I think, as Laurie said, mobilizing and organizing consistently around cases is very important. But I think long-term organizing to ensure that we're changing power structures, that we're changing laws is critical and key. We do a lot of that kind of work at Latina Institute to build power within Latinx communities specifically, who for many years have been marginalized, have been separated from our democracy, have been kept from being able to participate. And not just us, many people of color, Black women, Indigenous folks have been kept out of our systems. And so, we think that that's really critical in this moment, that there's long-term, year-round organizing, certainly around cases, because that supports sort of a connection to like what we're organizing for. But I think that's critically important. And that's something that we've seen through the Green Wave, that, they did year-round mobilizations. They created really broad coalitions that brought in folks from various parts of social justice movements. I think that's a really critical part that we need to do here in the US as well. And I think we need to also ensure that we are talking about pregnancy criminalization beyond just around abortion or miscarriage. There are so many situations, even before the fall of Roe versus Wade, where women, people who can get pregnant, were criminalized for, having addiction issues while they were pregnant, who were criminalized for poverty, for living in conditions that the state deemed unsafe for pregnancy. And all of those things tie back to the starting point for criminalization of folks who have miscarriages or have abortions. And so our struggles are tied with them as well. And there's some really great groups that folks should check out, like Pregnancy Justice and If, When, How, that are really supporting folks who are being criminalized for pregnancy outcomes and for their conditions of poverty while pregnant. I think that kind of alliance is really important. And again, year-round mobilization and organizing and building power are critical for us in this moment if we're going to combat what's happening.
I'm so glad you brought up the poverty aspect of this, because I just wish we're in an election year right now, and I wish the major media would do a better job of connecting the dots and asking these candidates questions, these candidates that like to call themselves pro-life. So, as you know, Lori, earlier this month, Mississippi and many Republican states rejected funds from the federal government to pay for summer food assistance programs for children. 10 Republican-controlled states are still refusing to expand Medicaid. So can you talk about the importance of connecting these issues?
Yeah, if you understand that their fundamental goal is to roll us back to a place where women have to be dependent on men, couples have to be dependent on the church. Like this is the goal, right? Like this is the goal. So when you understand that that's their goal, then their decisions make more sense. Because if I'm pro-life, then I would be pro-feeding kids, right? I would be anti-death penalty. I would be allegedly if I'm pro-life, allegedly, because you think that life has like a connotation in there, right? But they're not. They're the first ones to push against having summer lunch programs, school lunch programs, Medicaid expansion. We barely got postpartum Medicaid approved, and that was only because they were like, look at our post-Roe plan, we give you Medicaid. And it's such a it's such a non-congruent take, right? I don't see how you can say you're pro-life, pro-babies, pro-family, and still sit and not care that Jackson doesn't have clean water. Right? That's what we deal with in Mississippi, is like they don't care that Jackson kids don't have clean water, can possibly get lead poisoning, but they're really, really worried about what you're doing with your uterus.
Lupe, Dorothy.
I just want to say another word about social media and how we're using social media, because listening to Lori and Lupe, I'm struck by how urgent it is to get people aware politically of what is possible. Is what we do when we show a clip which is frightening or moving or inspiring, it's always followed by action items. It's always followed, once your heart is open and your mind is blown, then it says, here's what you can do locally. Here's the money you can spend to make this safer or more possible. And so what we're trying to do is use social media and clips of the films to do the things that Lupe and you are talking about are necessary.
We have another question. How do we get young activist groups to appreciate that some of us old activists, especially survivors of awful illegal abortions like me, I was sexually assaulted by the OBGYN at the end of the procedure. It was also incomplete. I want young women and their parent. I'm sorry, I can't understand the last part of this, but the gist of it is, how do we get young activists to really understand what older activists have gone through? And this is exactly what you're doing, Dorothy, with re-releasing the films.
What I trust is that once someone is touched, their heart is touched, their minds are open, there's a lot of information available. So one of the jobs we have through social media and the house parties is to open people's minds and touch their hearts, and then we give them information.
And I'm sorry, Lupe.
Oh, I was just going to say, Dorothy, I think it's so critical that you're sharing your films and stories, because I think young people need to hear them. Frankly, I feel like maybe part of the issue, as far as I've observed, is that we're not talking to each other. Some of the the activists who have been around for longer, the seasoned activists, like, aren't necessarily talking to the younger ones. So I think that's a starting point, just to talk and to share. And to create, and that we can create spaces for that. I think one of the other things that we've seen at Latina Institute, and I can speak to from our own experience, is that we have a very cross-generational movement within our network of we call them poderosas, of powerful people, powerful activists, and it's because we bring them together to find solutions together. So it's not one person, the older activists or the older folks in the room having all the answers, but really truly listening to younger folks and taking in their energy, their ideas, to be able to collaborate and come together with solutions. And I think I think those are some of the things that I feel like are really important to be able to close maybe gaps that folks have seen exist.
Listening, I had an inspiration, and Laura, you'll understand this. I have this idea of creating an online house party in which, in the first half hour, we show the film. And in the second half hour, people share. If it's young people, they share their fears and hopes. If it's older people, they share their own stories. So Lupe, you've just inspired me of a way that we can do this, because it doesn't cost very much to provide an online house party. And Laura, you know, because you've used the films.
And I was gonna say that I just think one of the things we don't to piggyback on what Lupe said, we don't talk to kids enough, kids, younger folks, just people, younger adults. A lot of times we want to like come from an expertise moment and wag our finger a little bit and be like, how don't you understand? Da, 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 da. But if we listened, we would understand that those kids understand these struggles a lot better than we think they do, because one, the engagement on TikTok around abortion is like beyond, and these girls are taking these dudes down like every night in debates. Clearly I'm on TikTok, but like they also have their own stories, right? They have their own stories of having to get their abortion before so that they could be back for basketball practice the next day, right? Like they have their own stories of their friends parenting, of their friends having abortions, of themselves having abortions, of them having miscarriages. So I just think if we would just talk to them more like regular people, every conversation, I have 7 kids. Every conversation doesn't have to be I'm an adult and you're the kid conversation. And they're ready, and they're so ready and down, like, and more radical than a lot of us.
Wow, Flory, I'm not on TikTok. So for those of us who are not familiar with what's going on, can you just give us elaborate a bit? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so TikTok is a platform where you can post short videos. They also have a live feature where you can go live. And a lot of times they'll have live debates. Like there's certain channels that like to do debates or informational topics. And abortion, obviously I'm on abortion side of TikTok, but your algorithm will start kind of like curating things that you're into. But like I get on there and talk to younger activists from all over the place, everywhere from New Zealand to Ohio. And we in lives we'll share things, like I'll correct disinformation. Like sometimes I just pop in there and just, I'll say, like that's not really true. Like it's not true that you're going to be infertile if you have an abortion. And I make my own content. So, I'm definitely Gen X TikTok, but like my videos get nice little bit of views, and I post like clips from stuff like this saying this is what's going on. And like my most popular clip is me saying that they'll never ever figure out a way to not get abortion pills in this country. I know that's saying a lot, but Ireland is an island. They couldn't keep them out of an island. So I just don't see where this, like, where it's going to happen. But that's the young women on there, like, yes, blah, blah, blah. This is my abortion story. And Reddit is the same way. Like Reddit, like r/abortion, which is a Reddit list serve that is managed by a group of activists, is very, very busy. Very busy.
A couple more questions before we end tonight. One person wonders, what is Planned Parenthood's role now? Can any of you answer that?
I can say that, I think Planned Parenthood continues to operate health centers across the country to be able to provide care. I think I worked at Planned Parenthood, full disclosure, and I think their ability to provide and have spaces for care is really important. I think there's an ecosystem that we all should recognize beyond Planned Parenthood, as Lori mentioned, of independent clinics who are the ones who provide most of the abortion care in this country. And of course of folks who are doing grassroots work at the state level, where it's so critical on the policy and advocacy side. I think for many years, folks have thought of Planned Parenthood as the one-stop shop for all of those things. But I think, I think their central role in this moment is in continuing to be a provider. But I do feel that there are many grassroots, community-centered groups that are doing more of the work in this moment to really build power for long-term change, and really, frankly, to get more than Roe. Roe, in many ways, was not enough of a protection for many in our communities. It wasn't enough, actually, for folks to actually get the care they needed. as Lori mentioned, right, in Mississippi, for a long time, there was only one clinic, and that meant that it was, abortion was largely inaccessible for people, even when Roe was the law of the land. And so I think there's a lot of work happening through at the grassroots space at the state level that folks should check out to be able to see how we're building power, to get protections in legal protections, but also to go beyond that to get real access for everyone, and again, go bigger than we had with Roe, than what we had with Roe.
Final thoughts from all of you about where you think we are going from here. And I think it's important to really lay out what's at stake. And, given the fact that the Federalist Society's Leonard Leo, that's the conservative who reshaped the court system, has an endless amount of money, and he funnels it to anti-abortion groups. The 19th's Amanda Becker just had a piece about that. They're doing whatever they can to ensure that mifepristone is illegal. So again, endless amounts of money. Talk a little bit about how you think House parties, activists, what is going to happen to counter that, and what your thoughts are about where we're going and how tonight's listeners can get involved.
Well, I'd like to begin by saying a key to the House parties is going to be information about registering to vote. And not only that, but getting other people to register to vote. And not only that, but the issues that they can have an opportunity to vote on. So I think getting out the vote and supporting people registering is an absolute cornerstone, that one of the things we're going to be working on.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. I think online house parties is my jam, because as a disabled person, that's like what I do, is show up online all the time. I think that folks can get themselves plugged in. I always say I can always find you something to do in the movement. It doesn't matter if it's just promoting stuff online, or if it's showing up to the legislature when we go and meet with lawmakers, or it's helping put together an abortion storytelling event, right? There's all kinds of ways to be plugged in. And the thing I just caution people about is you don't have to reinvent the wheel, y'all. Y'all don't have, we don't have to, no disrespect to the Auntie Network, but like, abortion funds already exist. No disrespect to anybody who wants to do their own thing, but it's okay for you to not be the leader, and for you to just join in and do stuff with folks who have already established a lot of stuff, versus than taking away from resources. Because the crazy thing is, we shouldn't have such limited resources, but we currently do. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about what Lori and what Dorothy both said about like voting, engagement, and plugging in where you can. At Latina Institute, we're doing three things in the next 5-10 years. We're looking at low-hanging fruit at the policy level, to be able to, as we put it, stop the bleeding, right? Like to get some kind of protection where we can at the state level. So through ballot initiatives, through state legislative advocacy, to be able to combat criminalization and combat, the bans that exist. We're looking at the federal level and thinking about what kinds of things we can do through Congress. Congress is largely inactive. However, there are things we can do to continue to push forward on federal policy to make things better. And our hope again is to do something to stop the bleeding, to put something in rights. But we recognize that's not enough. And so the other things that we're doing are working on narrative and culture shift. We really think that it's critical to connect with folks about these issues, where they are, and through their stories, through the stories of community, to change hearts and minds, so that we can get to a point where there is no longer stigma around abortion. There is no longer stigma around these issues within communities. We know already that largely in the Latinx community, most people, over 65%, believe in and support abortion access, but we want that to be higher, and we want to get to a point where the community is connected to this issue as it's supposed to be, as healthcare. And then the final thing is we're thinking about the long term, and how we get lasting change that sticks, that that really reflects what we need in the community. And that goes, and we see that happening through power structure change. And how we're doing that and how we're thinking about that is investing in communities, investing in individuals in communities most impacted, BIPOC, low-income communities, to build their power so that they can truly fight for a representative democracy, fight to change the democracy to actually reflect our values, and to be able to have communities in the future that are responsive to what we need and not driven by capitalism and other systems of power that were never meant to serve us or never meant to support us.
Dorothy, any final thoughts before we say goodnight?
No, it's just been such a pleasure for me to listen to your other guests and learn about what's going on in the trenches now, because I know a lot about the past and we're just beginning to tap into the present. So I'm really grateful that this happened not only with my films, but with these two wonderful women who are in the trenches and care passionately.
Well, one final thought from a listener: you all rock. Thank you so much for your amazing work. And a shout out to you, Dorothy, for your lifetime commitment to justice. We want to thank Lupe Rodriguez, Executive Director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, Lori Bertram Roberts, Executive Director of the Mississippi Reproductive Freedom Fund, and Dorothy Fadiman, filmmaker and Executive Director of Concentric Media, for joining us. Be sure to visit choiceatrisk.org to watch Dorothy's films, When Abortion Was Illegal and From Danger to Dignity. Lupe, Lori, and Dorothy, thank you so much for your important work, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
Rose.
Thank you.
And thanks to Hannah Latimer Snell, CJ Springer, Kathy Yoshiba, Paul George, and David Simon for working behind the scenes to make this event possible. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We will definitely continue this important conversation. Have a good night.